Shalom, everyone. We're holding in our learning in Bava Metzia in Perek Ezeu Neshech that deals with interest. We all know that for many centuries, interest was identified with Jews. Loaning with interest in Judaism from the Torah is not allowed both to lower the loaner and to get a loan with interest. And both in Christianity and in Islam, there's this Isser is also exists, and therefore they use Jews, and unfortunately, it caused a lot of stereotype, anti-Semite stereotypes about Jews, that they're greedy, and they will, they hold their money. And we all know the stories, we all know the pictures, and it is definitely a very sensitive piece of history that we have. But nevertheless, it is really fascinating to see that the lo ta'aseh, the deoraita isur that we have about interest, is Chazal are saying there's 6 different lavim, there's 6 different forbidden things to do with interest, and one of them is lifnei iver lo titen michshol. In other words, don't lead your brother as a blind person towards doing something which is forbidden, just to show us how greatly the Torah views the fact that someone is taking ribit or is giving ribit. Chazal came out with a solution of heter iska, like a way to get loans with interest, if it's part of a bank, part of a deal that many people are partners. But I want to go back today to the principle, to the core of the psukim, the verses that are written in Vayikra, that forbid interest, and see if we can dig from them, like the root, the heart, the reason even of why is it so bad to deal with interest. So I'm sharing the sources, and let's see. So we have a few psukim, few verses in Vayikra, in Vayikra 25. And they're saying the following: if your kin, being in straits, come under your authority and are held by you as though resident alliance, let them live by your side. Do not exact advanced or accrue interest, but fear your God. Let your kin live by your side as such. Okay, so twice it says, let your kin, let your brother, let your re'ah live with you and by you. In other words, we are responsible for our kin. We are responsible for our friends and family and nation in people. And if we have the ability to help them, when we see that they are, starting to lose their money, to lose their status, to go low in society, we have the responsibility and even the obligation to help them. And it's very interesting that the psukim are saying, fear your God. Okay, what does fearing God has to do with this? And the Torah doesn't use yirat Elohim, God-fearing, in every mitzvah. And then continues to say, do not lend your money at advanced interest, nor give your food at accurate interest. I am God, your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt to give you the land of Canaan to be your God. Another very surprising comment. Not only fear your God, but also remember that I am God who took you out of Egypt to bring you to the Holy Land to be your God. In other words, interest in a way is going against God-fearing, and it is as if when we do it is as if we did not understand, the purpose of God taking us out of Egypt and giving us this land. And when Rashi is seeing it obviously, and he's saying, but be afraid of your God, says Rashi, because men's thought are greatly attracted by the idea of taking interest. And it is and it becomes difficult to him to keep aloof from it. In other words, Rashi says interest can be done without a big deal. And people can do it hidingly, secretly, and people love to make more money in an easy way. And so their heart is going after it. Therefore, says Rashi, so that he tries to persuade himself that it is a legitimate act on account of the fact that this money will otherwise remain unemployed. Scripture was complete to state, but be afraid of God. Or take another case. If one pretend that his money belonged to a non-Jew in order to be able to lend it to an Israelite in an ostensibly legitimate way, this is given only to his heart and thought to know the real circumstances of the case. Scriptures, therefore, was compelled to state, but be afraid of God. So Rashi says, in one hand, it's something that we really want to do. People the heart and mind of people are going after it, and they thoughts are greatly attracted by the idea of taking interest. It seemed like easy money, and it's in our thought, and when we think it, we come to believe that it's okay, and we justify it ourselves in doing it. We didn't do anything wrong. Therefore, says Rashi, the Torah emphasized be God-fearing. In other words, you should know that God is watching. And if you're a real God-fearing person, in those little things that you can do to have more and to think to yourself, nobody get hurt by that. No, be afraid of God, be a God-fearing. This mitzvah is an example of a high expectation from moral high expectations from us as human beings and as Jews in this case. And if we do it, we kind of let God down. We disappoint God. And that's why God is saying, remember that I'm God who took you out of the land of Egypt. The Sforno is pointing another emphasis on something that we saw already in Bava Metzia in Samech Aleph, the machloket between Rabbi Akiva and Ben Petorah. If you have just one bottle of water, none of you should watch the other person die, or you should prefer your life before. And the Sforno says it's the same thing. It's the same thing here, that let them live by your side. Let them live by your side. First, you have to make sure that you have enough for yourself that you can help them, and don't forget yourself. You are required to do this if the Lord has endowed you, so that you are financially able alongside you, teaches what our sages terms your own life extend such loan, and the word takes precedence over that of your fellow. Okay, so in other words, your life takes precedence before the life of your fellow. But if you have the ability, you have an obligation to do that. Do not let them go down without you helping them. And the Rambam, when it comes to talk about the ilchot of ribit, of interest, is saying neshech and marbit are one in the same. In other words, it's neshech v'tarbit are two words saying the same thing. Do not give him your money with neshech, and do not put forth your food in marbit. And further on in Deuteronomy, in Devarim, it says neshech from money, neshech from food, neshech from any substance that you will acquire. Why is interest called neshech, asked the Rambam? Because it bites. The word neshech in Hebrew is like the word linshoch, to bite. It's the same root. So says the Rambam, because it bites, it causes pain to one's colleague and consume his flesh. That's how hurtful it is to take neshech. When you take interest, is as if you're biting your friend, you're biting your fellow man. okay, from something that maybe it hurts him, and take away a little piece, but this is something crucial. It caused pain to one's colleague and consume his flesh. And why did the Torah refer it with two terms? So that one would commit it twofold transgression when when violating this prohibition. In other words, if you take interest, you should know that it's two isur, it's two prohibitions. That's why the Torah is using two terms that means the same. But the root of what the Rambam is saying is it's really, it's even scary. The Rambam is saying in neshech, interest is as if we bite our friend and we hurting him. And that's why it's so crucial and it's so important not to do it. And it's something that, again, we can say, oh, nothing happened, nothing really happened. No, interest is like biting, and we should remember that. I think that the overall feeling of that prohibition is what we know from Shavuot, that says all of Israel are responsible for one another. Ken Kol Israel arevim ze leze. That we have a responsibility to each other, and in this responsibility, even if we can do something that it's not a big deal, we should not do it. We need to have the interest and the welfare of our fellow person and the top of our priorities if we're able to help. And indeed, the famous halacha that the Rambam is saying in Ilchot Tzedakah, that the highest level of giving tzedakah, the highest level beyond which there is none, is a person, the level beyond which is none, is a person who supports a Jew who has fallen into poverty by giving him a present or a loan, entering into partnership with him, or finding him work so that his hand will be fortified. Again, his hand will be fortified so that he will not have to ask others. In other words, do that which is not a tzedakah. This is not giving, I'm a rich person or I am able person, giving a tzedakah to someone who is poor. No. Let him have his self-esteem. Let him have his dignity. Help him out so he can help himself, and he can use his hand to be fortified. And concerning this state, you shall support him, the stranger, the resident, and he shall live among you. Again, v'chai imach, implied is that you should support him before he falls and becomes needy. In other words, it goes back to the pasuk in Sefer Vayikra. If your kin being in strait come under your authority and are held by you as though resident alliance, let them live by your side. Okay, let them live by your side. Fear God, let them live by your side, and help them in return their dignity and self-esteem in order for them to serve, to function and to live in this life. There's a very interesting phrase, a verse in Proverbs, where it says, "Ashir berashim imshol ve'eved loveh le'ish moveh," and the borrower is a slave to the lender. The rich rule the poor. And the Midrash in Vayikra Rabbah is using these pasuk with another pasuk from Mishlei to say something about our topic, about interest. And the Midrash is saying another exposition of the verse, if your kinsman is in strait, is the pasuk that we saw in Vayikra. It is written in the scripture, one who is generous to the poor makes a loan to the Lord. He will repay what is due. In other words, if you are generous and you give a loan to the poor without interest, it's as if you gave loan to God, and God will repay the due. And therefore, says the Midrash, Rabbi Tanchuma taught in the name of Rabbi Chia, and Rabbi Nachman taught in the name of Rabbi Yudah, son in the name of Rav Yudan, son of Rabbi Shimon, and Rabbanan taught in the name of Rabbi Shimon ben Lakish. In other words, this is such an important tradition that different groups have said and have taught that tradition. What is it? If not for the verse of scripture, it would be impossible to say this. As it were, it is usual for the borrower to become the servant of the lender, as it is written, the borrower is a servant to the lender. That's the pasuk that we saw. In other words, says the Midrash, giving loan with giving before giving a loan with interest, even without the interest, just having the relationship of a borrower and a loaner, it becomes a relationship of slavery. It's as if, says the Midrash, and it's as if um, the borrower becomes the servant of the lender. And what does that have to do with interest? That if you take interest, or you're willing to allow or you're willing to pay interest if you take a loan, then what you're saying is that you're willing to be the slave of a human being. And the whole idea, as we saw in Vayikra, is remember that I took you out from the land of Mitzrayim. I took you out of the land of Mitzrayim for you to be my slaves and not people's slave. And the interest is doing it even in an even worse situation. And maybe that's why the Mishnah in Sanhedrin is saying that there's a list of people that are invalid of giving testimony. And let's read the list: dice player, usurers, pigeon flyers, and sellers, and sabbatical sellers of sabbatical goods. And the usurers here is giving interest. That's the meaning of it. In other words, the Sanhedrin is telling us, the Mishnah Sanhedrin is telling us, there's something immoral about people who take interest, like people who play dice and other things that are mentioning here that we'll maybe learn some other time. That's how bad Judaism views people who take interest. And really, we hear it in a very moving and difficult description, and in the prophet of Ezekiel, that in chapter 18, when he describes when people come and say, oh, God is punishing children because of the sin of their parents, and Yechezkel is saying, no, God is punishing each person according to their own behavior. And then he goes to describe the perfect righteous person. And when one of the description of the perfect righteous person is, if a certain man is righteous and does what is just and right, if he has not lent at advanced interest or exacted occurrence accrued interest, if he has abstained from wrongdoing and executed true justice between one party and another, there's a list. It's not such a long list, but when Yechezkel needs to choose a righteous person, he makes sure that not taking interest is one of the ways to describe a righteous person. And when he describes the opposite, the Rasha, he says exactly the opposite. He has lent an advanced interest or exacted accurate interest. Shall he live? He shall not live. If he has committed any of these abominations, he shall die. He has forfeited his life. In other words, the opposite of a righteous person is the good person. The opposite of the righteous person is the bad person. And the sinner, one of his main sins is taking interest. So we hear from that we understand that it's really, really crucial. And when the Gemara in Bava Metzia that we already learned is asking, why is it that on these three different places we hear about Mitzrayim, the mitzvah of, let's read the question by Rava. Rava says, why do I need to mention the Exodus from Egypt and the merciful one, that the merciful one wrote in the context of the halachot of prohibition against interest, and the mention of the Exodus from Egypt with regard to the mitzvah of ritual fringes of tzitzit. And it's mentioned Exodus in the context of prohibition concerning weight, in that you are stealing or you're doing something unjust with a weight in your marketplace, in your store. And Rava explains that all these things are things that nobody can see. And people can even not know. That's one thing. But the other thing is that you can pretend that you're not doing them, or you're doing them in the right way. You can pretend that you're not taking interest. You can pretend that you dye your tzitzit with blue, but you really use something that will later on will prove that it's not the real blue. You can pretend that you're actually not cheating with your weights in your store. And all of that, says Rava, all of that things, you should know that God is watching. And God, who took us out of Egypt, it's not so that we'll become cheaters and establish a society based on cheating, based on untruth, and based on suspecting each people, for not being fair or not being right with what they're doing. We were out of Egypt, so we will establish a higher social, moral society. And that's why in all these things, we need to be God-fearing. We need to remember why God took us out of Egypt. And maybe it's right to end with the Yerushalmi in Baba Metzia that says, Rav Yasa says, to teach you that why God gave us the mitzvah of interest, to teach you that anyone who lands at interest is a heretic. In other words, interest is heresy, because if you take interest, or you're willing to pay interest to someone, then you're saying God is not ruling this world, or God did not take us out of Mitzrayim to be his people, or to be a people that behave in a righteous, moral, just, truthful way. Okay, so you take interest, you're doing it not against human being, you're doing it also against God, and you're not being God-fearing, but you're being a heretic. Do not forget Yetziat Mitzrayim and the purpose of Yetziat Mitzrayim. Do not forget your responsibility over your people. Do not forget that if you have the ability to help, you should help. And do not forget that God is always watching what you're doing, even if you think no one is watching.